What if the neighbor you lock out today is the person who guarded your family when you were in danger? Today, South Africa is wrestling with a difficult irony. Despite the country's natural beauty, recent divisions have seen some people turn against other Africans who have come there seeking a better life. But decades ago, the division in South Africa was written into the law. This was apartheid, a system of racial segregation and forced oppression that was enforced by a powerful, highly militarized government. While much of the outside world offered public speeches or economic boycotts, those measures alone couldn't break the regime. Defeating such a deeply entrenched system required an invisible, physical lifeline. That lifeline came from Ghana. Having just won its own independence in 1957, Ghana was a young nation dedicated to the ideals of freedom and justice for the entire continent. On a map, the two countries couldn't be much further apart. They sit on opposite ends of Africa, separated by thousands of miles. Bridging that massive gap wasn't a matter of sending letters. It required engineering a highly classified underground network. That extreme distance actually provided the perfect cover. It allowed Ghana to serve as a covert headquarters, safely out of reach of the apartheid government's immediate reach. Imagine being a South African activist targeted by the regime. You couldn't just buy a plane ticket or walk across a border legally without being arrested. To solve this, Ghanaian intelligence worked directly with liberation movements to produce the forged identity documents and travel papers needed to slip past the authorities. For high-level leaders of groups like the ANC, Ghana even issued official diplomatic passports. This gave them a layer of legal protection that made them difficult for border guards to touch. These passports allowed band leaders to travel the world, attend international conferences, and set up offices to rally global support for their cause. These forged papers and official identities were the first tools that allowed the resistance to operate beyond the borders of apartheid. Once activists successfully reached Ghana, they weren't just sent to a camp. They were placed in a network of discreet, urban safe houses. These were secure locations where high-profile strategists could live and plan their next moves without the constant threat of assassination. But many of those who arrived were survivors of severe torture in apartheid prisons. They reached Ghana with deep physical and emotional scars. Ghanaian hospitals and doctors provided specialized medical care and psychological rehabilitation, services that were simply unavailable to them anywhere else. Before the movement could move forward, its people had to be restored. Ghana became a place of physical and psychological recovery. Once they recovered, many activists were sent to remote military camps. There, they were trained in the combat and guerrilla tactics they would need to take the fight back home. Ghana also served as a crucial transit point for weapons. The military coordinated logistics to ensure arms reached liberation fighters without being intercepted. But revolutions need more than just hardware. They need a way to manage money while staying invisible to the apartheid government's intelligence services. The Bank of Ghana and other institutions provided secure ways to manage and transfer funds raised internationally, ensuring the movement's money stayed safe and accessible. Bravery is the engine of a revolution, but it requires a steady supply of resources to keep moving. In secret, Ghana provided both of these. There was also a war of information. Ghana operated underground radio networks and intelligence sharing systems that acted as an early warning network. These stations broadcasted in South African languages to warn people on the ground about troop movements and planned crackdowns before they happened. Ghana also looked toward the future. The government provided scholarships to South African students who had been expelled or banned for their activism back home. By educating these young activists, Ghana was preparing the professionals and thinkers who would eventually govern a free South Africa. This timeline shows how the resistance grew over decades. While many factors contributed to the struggle, the steady influx of Ghanaian support provided a consistent source of momentum for the liberation movement. The public moments of victory that finally ended apartheid were supported by this essential foundation. This hidden infrastructure allowed the movement to survive long enough to win its freedom. The leaders who eventually took office in a new democratic South Africa were able to do so because they had been protected, funded, and educated by their allies in Ghana. It's a reminder that South Africa's independence wasn't a solo achievement. It was a deeply shared victory for the whole of Africa. Bringing that history back to the present changes how we look at today's tensions over immigration and xenophobia. When we see how closely these nations were tied together in the dark days of the struggle, modern hostility toward fellow Africans doesn't just feel wrong, it feels like a betrayal of that shared history. This historical alliance is a powerful example of what can be achieved when African nations choose unity and mutual support over division. Ultimately, true freedom means honoring the neighbors who stood by you when you needed them most. This history was brought to you by Levo Global Ministry Academy, USA, courtesy of Cletus Wilson.